The masterclass on application of generative AI for making government future ready by Saurabh Karn has been interesting and informative. Now we have a question and answer round. Our first question is: can you throw some light on fake news detection tools and methods?
Fake news detection is a very complex problem. It's very complex problem for two reasons. One, you can statistically classify, and there's a lot of work that has happened in fake news detection also. You can statistically classify whether an input information is correct or not. But because large language models are probabilistic models, there is no proof that I can give you why I think this is a fake news or not. And some of the high and while like simple ML models, even using large language models, they can do a very good job of classifying it. For more sophisticated, more complex reasoning tasks, I think there are new areas of research like symbolic AI, which is used to generate those proofs. However, they are still in the works, right? So to answer your question, and might not be a very satisfying question, is that large language models and some of the machine learning models which is available, there are a lot of organizations like Tattle which are working on these problem as well, where they are trying to identify if a particular piece of information, if it is indexed in a fact database itself or not. And from there, what I can do is I can classify and say whether something is like a reliable piece of information or not. But that is the extent of information that I have. I am also limited by my knowledge. I can go back, check in again, but yeah, I think the work is still in progress with respect to disinformation.
How would artificial intelligence play a role in delivery to citizens of government services in the domain of health, old age pensions, and similar services?
Yeah, so no, very good question. I think with respect to schemes work that we have shown in Jugalbandi, it is an overarching work, right? Like, so if there are government scheme deliveries, if we just talk about that, it doesn't differentiate between like a health scheme versus like a pension scheme versus like a another scheme, right? So if the archetype of some of these problems are quite similar, and that basically means a citizen almost always knows what they need, and they need to be able to discover what is the help that government can provide via medium of a scheme or something else through that. And once you have discovered that particular scheme, can you help me figure out whether I'm eligible for that particular scheme or not? So then a series of like question and answer is something that the system can do with you to identify whether you're eligible or not. There are some complex like engineering flows that we put in there. And once you know that a person is eligible, by building these systems in private, by linking it with like other identification systems, KYC systems, what you can also do is you can automatically enroll them and get them into the like the scheme ambit in some sense, right? So it does not necessarily differ a lot with respect to like a health, finance, and things like that in case of like the scheme delivery. But for more nuanced things, I think we will have to have a conversation around it. But yeah, like in terms of accessing like health information, for example, Anganwadis, right? A lot of Anganwadis in India, they do a constant check in like among the pregnant women, just to ensure that whether their nutrition is happening fine or not, and or whether they are taking care of their bodies or not, right? Some of those things can be now assisted by an AI. So those can be like assisted modes of AI that we could use. Scheme delivery could be another area in how like health and finance, some of those things are assisted. But yeah, like I think we will be limited by our imagination. If there are more creative ideas, we can think about like how AI can be applied in those cases.
What is the technical feasibility of how we can address consumer issues related to the use of home use medical equipment devices or any other quality issues related to implants reported through various platforms such as social media, government driver portals, etc.?
This is I'm very very sorry. I haven't. This is not an area where I hold expertise or have very deep information on. So I'll refrain from answering this question. But I think like wherever there is an information, and I think a frame generally which helps is that to ask this question like how is it happening today, And once you know how is it happening today, in that process, you will find out there are parts of the work which are very, very mechanical. So for example, if you are sourcing information from social media and then you are classifying or categorizing them, maybe there's a use case for an AI there, right? But again, I'm not an expert in that area, so I won't be able to answer that question. But it's definitely a very interesting problem to think about and see like how it would work. I would still assume that human intervention is something that you can't dispense here, right? Like so, again, medical is a high stakes use case, just like law and justice, just like how government work happens, and and I'm quite certain that human beings would be required in the entire process.
How about the other vernacular languages in this?
Oh, I think again, right? Like this is a topic which I think like Abhishek sir, Rajneesh sir would also like sort of attest to. I think we are limited by data, right? So what is the work that happened in building of these language models? I think Abhishek sir would know much better. But if I were to take a shot, right, like we would have taken a lot of like parallel language corpus which PIB generates. So PIB is anyways officially like translating in a number of languages. Then you have subtitling where your movie already has an audio and has a subtitle in a number of different languages. So from there I am getting like speech to text data. If we are able to source, and now the key, so by the way, like it does not matter, like we don't need to get like a very, very vast volume of data. We don't need a lot of like language data in terms of speech, in terms of written text. And a lot of like Indian languages also don't have text, so these are like completely speech to speech things, right? Techniques are there, so there is enough research that has happened in like past 1 or 2 years where there are models which are proposed which can directly do speech to speech translation, right? Some of those languages can be built, but as long as we can do, and one of the things, if I'm not wrong, which Bhashni is also doing, which is like Bhasha Dan, right? Like in Bhasha Dan, citizens can come, they can correct the data, they can contribute their audio data, and all of this data basically is what is going to make this machine learning model learn how to, like transcribe, translate, and things like that. So if we talk about other language models or like other vernacular languages, I think we are limited by just the data. So if there can be concentrated effort, partnerships, I don't know, like you all are probably like masters of that. If we figure out a way to get very high quality data in 1,000 Indian languages, I think 1,000 Indian languages are possible. So the limitation is not so much on the technical side, but it is a lot in terms of what is the data that is available for us to train these models.
Generative AI is a very small part of AI with a lot of unanswered questions and issues. Should the government really be spending so much money on this narrow area?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you like why we spend a lot of time on these problems. I think we spend a lot of time on these problems and thinking about solutions in these directions is because the existing solutions are probably like limited by certain things, right? And R&D or some of these new techniques might be showing us light which was not possible earlier, right? We look at the potential of something and its ability to fundamentally change some of these interactions and bridge some of these gaps. And to be very honest, like we are walking like a Sherpa, right? Like without having too much of agenda, we are walking in for the enthusiasm and love for exploring some of these problems. Whether the government should be or shouldn't be like looking at in this area would fundamentally depend on like what is the problem that you're obsessing about, whether that problem is complex enough, vast enough for it to demand this or not. But I think largely from a science and tech and like research and development perspective, I think it's a good thing to be there, because another thing that we see often is that when one single party, which is like probably like for-profit sectors, right, like industries, they spend a lot of time on R&D, and once and almost always like not-for-profit governments becomes like a lagger in this particular case, right? Like so they are catching up on technology or like adopting technology, right? If nothing, understanding and spending time on just being aware, being like at the cutting edge of like understanding of how these systems work, I think that is something that anyone, regardless of whether you're in government or not, should be doing. Is again, it's my personal opinion around it. Should the government be spending time and energy on generative AI? I think it's for the governments to really decide, because they understand their priorities really, really well. We do it for the love and enthusiasm of like problem solving in some of these areas, which are very, very hard problems to solve, which I think you would also attest to.
How can this help the researchers where there is contradictory information based on place, people, and environment? How can this solve the problem for such issues for researchers?
That's a very, very broad question, so I'm not able to answer that immediately. I think there are two, three things that LLMs can do on that side of story, right? Like one, it can help you identify, and you don't even need large language models, like very good embedding models that themselves like do this work, but surfacing those contradictions is probably one of the first things that LLMs can help you, right? Like, so if you're dealing with massive amount of data and you're trying to find out contradictory information, I think some of automation opportunities in some of those areas is what your large language models or embedding models would like provide you with. And that could significantly enhance your ability to focus on certain issues rather than, trying to sift through some of this data by yourself manually. But again, like these are very, very nuanced questions, so we will need to chat about it to understand what is in there.
What is the massive energy usage and computational requirement for LLMs?
Depending on use cases, you might not need like 1.8 trillion parameter model, right? Like you could be doing with like a 7 billion parameter model, and those 7 billion parameter models run very well on your systems, right? I think these systems do consume a lot of electricity and energy, and that's why maybe identifying high stakes use cases where or like use cases which really demand this technology is going to be very critical. Again, this is something that has just come into the world and we are all exploring, and I think some of that clarity in terms of where is the balance we are going to arrive at like soon. I don't know if I have answered your question, Himanshu, but like with respect to LLMs, I think it's a problem across the globe that everyone is sort of like trying to answer. I think the answer is probably in like smaller models for specific tasks as well. On that note, thank you so much, Venkatesh sir. Sorry for like interruption.
Hope you enjoyed this masterclass and thank you for watching. Don't forget to tune into our next one.